Are we in the wrong country? The sentence did not come from fear. It came from confusion, quiet and precise, as if the words themselves were afraid to be wrong. The voice had been steady. Clear. German. Perfect German. Not broken. Not memorized. Not the kind learned from a phrasebook or shouted across a battlefield. It carried rhythm. Structure. The weight of someone who had once read poetry in that language. The women did not move. Not immediately. The air in the camp held still, thick under the late afternoon heat, somewhere near 90 degrees, the kind of southern heat that pressed against skin and slowed thought. Barbed wire stretched in clean lines behind them. Watchtowers stood silent. A flag moved lazily in the distance. Everything looked exactly as they had been told it would. Except for the voice. Anna Weiss stood in the second row, her hands resting loosely at her sides, fingers slightly curled as if holding something invisible. She had learned to stand that way in field hospitals, conserving energy, conserving presence. Around her, the other nurses remained upright, composed, but their eyes shifted, searching without turning their heads. No one spoke. No one dared to break the moment too quickly, as if doing so would shatter whatever fragile understanding had just been introduced into the air. The voice came again. This time slower. Measured. Each word placed carefully, like someone arranging objects on a table. Instructions, simple ones, about movement, about routine, about where to stand and when to proceed. But it was not the content that mattered. It was the delivery. There was no edge in it. No attempt to dominate. No performance of authority. Just clarity. Just control. Anna felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, not relief, not yet, but something adjacent to it, something that interrupted the expectation she had carried across the ocean. They had been prepared for shouting. For commands they could not understand. For humiliation disguised as order. Instead, they were listening to their own language returned to them without distortion. She shifted her weight slightly, the gravel beneath her boots crunching just enough to remind her that this was still real, still a place defined by fences and schedules and oversight. A man stepped into view at the front of the formation. American uniform. Clean lines. Boots polished but not obsessively. His posture was straight, but not rigid. He did not rush. He did not scan them like inventory. He simply stood there, as if presence alone was sufficient. Captain Daniel Brooks. The name would come later. For now, he was just the man who spoke German as if he had never stopped. He looked at them, not over them, not through them, but directly, one face at a time, without lingering too long on any single person. It was not inspection. It was acknowledgement. The difference was small, but it changed the air. Somewhere to Anna's left, one of the younger nurses inhaled sharply, then stopped herself, as if even breathing too loudly might draw attention to the fact that something unusual was happening. The captain continued, explaining the structure of the camp, the expectations, the hours. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The words carried on their own. Anna noticed the precision of his pronunciation, the absence of hesitation. This was not a skill used for effect. This was familiarity. He had lived inside the language at some point. The thought arrived quietly, without invitation, and she did not know what to do with it. Around them, the camp remained unchanged. Guards stood where guards always stood. The sun angled slightly lower, casting longer shadows across the packed dirt. A truck moved somewhere beyond the fence, its engine low and steady. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary movements. And yet the center of the moment had shifted, not outward, but inward, into something harder to define. When he finished speaking, he did not ask for questions. He did not demand acknowledgement. He simply paused, as if allowing the silence to complete what the words had started. No one stepped forward. No one challenged him. Not because they were afraid. But because something in the way he had spoken had removed the need. Anna lowered her gaze for a brief second, not in submission, but in recalibration. The world she had prepared for did not include this version of an enemy. Not one who spoke without hostility. Not one who chose precision over power. She lifted her eyes again, just as the captain turned slightly, preparing to move on to the next part of the routine. And in that small movement, that unremarkable transition, she realized the question had not been rhetorical. It had been real. Are we in the wrong country? She did not answer it. Not yet. But for the first time since her capture, the certainty she had carried felt incomplete. The formation broke without a command. Not suddenly, not chaotically, but in a quiet sequence, as if each woman had decided at the same time to move without being told. Boots shifted against gravel. Fabric brushed softly in the heat. No one spoke. They followed the indicated path across the yard, past the low wooden barracks that smelled faintly of pine and sun-warmed dust. Anna walked near the center of the group, her pace measured, her posture unchanged, but her attention no longer fixed on the ground in front of her. It had lifted, slightly, just enough to observe. The camp revealed itself in small details. A row of canteens placed in the shade. A stack of neatly folded blankets inside an open doorway. A radio playing somewhere in the distance, low volume, a brass instrument carrying a slow melody that none of them recognized but all of them noticed. It did not belong to war. It belonged to something else. Something ordinary. They were led into a long barracks building, the interior cooler by a few degrees, the air moving through screened windows. Wooden bunks lined the walls in clean symmetry. No clutter. No improvisation. Everything placed with intention. Anna paused for half a second at the threshold, not because she was unsure, but because the space did not match what she had prepared herself to see. She stepped inside. The others followed. A corporal stood near the entrance, holding a clipboard. He spoke in English at first, then stopped, glanced toward the open doorway, and switched to German. Not as precise. Not as fluid. But understandable. Functional. It was enough. Anna noticed the difference immediately. This was learned language. Useful language. Not the same as the voice from before. The distinction settled quietly in her mind. Two Americans. Two ways of speaking. Two intentions, perhaps. She moved to an empty bunk near the window and placed her small bundle of belongings at the foot of the bed. The mattress was thin but clean. The sheets smelled faintly of soap. She ran her fingers across the fabric once, then stopped, as if the gesture itself required explanation she did not yet have. Around her, the others began to settle in similar ways. No conversation. Only movement. A woman across the aisle adjusted the blanket twice, aligning the corners with unnecessary precision. Another sat down slowly, testing the weight of the bed as if it might disappear. Anna sat last. She lowered herself carefully, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. Outside, footsteps passed by the window. Voices, distant, layered, none of them raised. The rhythm of the place was steady. Predictable. Not forced. After a few minutes, the corporal finished his instructions and stepped outside. The door remained open. No one rushed to close it. The absence of urgency created its own kind of tension. Anna turned her head slightly toward the window. Through the screen, she could see a portion of the yard. The same officer stood there, speaking now with another soldier. English this time. Faster. More casual. The German was gone, replaced by something lighter, less deliberate. She watched his hands as he spoke. Controlled. Minimal. No wasted motion. He finished the conversation and glanced, briefly, toward the barracks. Not searching. Not inspecting. Just aware. For a moment, his eyes met the general direction of the window, not specifically her, not specifically anyone, but enough that she felt the connection register. Then he looked away and continued walking. The moment passed without acknowledgement. Anna exhaled slowly, though she had not realized she was holding her breath. Across the room, someone finally spoke, barely above a whisper. A question, not directed at anyone in particular, more to the space itself. Why would he speak our language like that? No one answered. Not because they did not have thoughts, but because none of the answers felt stable enough to be spoken aloud. Anna did not look toward the voice. She kept her gaze forward, her expression unchanged. But the question remained, moving quietly beneath the surface of everything else. Not loud. Not urgent. Just present. She adjusted her hands slightly, placing one over the other, grounding herself in something physical, something certain. The bunk beneath her did not move. The air continued to circulate. Outside, the same low music carried on, steady and indifferent to the questions forming inside the room. Anna listened to it for a few seconds, then shifted her attention inward again. The language he used had not just translated instructions. It had altered distance. Not removed it. Not erased it. But changed it. Enough to be noticed. Enough to matter. She did not yet know what to do with that. So she did nothing. She sat. She observed. And she waited, not for answers, but for the next moment that would require her to understand something she had not expected to understand. The evening settled without announcement. Light shifted first, softening along the edges of the barracks windows, turning sharp lines into something less defined. The heat did not leave, but it loosened its grip, dropping a few degrees as the sun lowered behind the trees beyond the fence. Inside, the room adjusted with it. Shoulders relaxed by small increments. Movements slowed. The silence remained, but it changed in texture, less rigid, more breathable. Anna stood near the window now, her hand resting lightly against the wooden frame, not leaning, just touching. Outside, a line had formed near a long table set beneath a narrow awning. Metal containers reflected the last of the sunlight. The smell reached her before the sight fully registered. Something warm. Something cooked. Not thin. Not stretched. Real food. The women began to move again, drawn not by command, but by recognition. Hunger had its own language, and this one required no translation. They stepped out in pairs and singles, forming a quiet line that mirrored the one already in place. Anna joined without hesitation, her place somewhere in the middle, her gaze steady, taking in the details without turning her head. Too much. A soldier stood behind the table, serving portions onto metal trays. He spoke briefly to each person, sometimes in English, sometimes attempting German. The words were simple. Take this. Move forward. Careful, it is hot. Functional. Respectful. Nothing more. When Anna reached the front, she extended her hand slightly, accepting the tray with a small nod. The food was arranged without decoration. A portion of meat, sliced and warm. Potatoes, soft, with a trace of butter. A piece of bread, pale and thick. Steam rose in thin lines, disappearing into the evening air. She stepped aside, allowing the next woman to move forward, and found a place at one of the long wooden tables. The surface was worn but clean. She sat, placing the tray in front of her, her hands resting briefly on either side as if anchoring the moment before it could move too quickly. Around her, the others did the same. No one rushed. No one spoke loudly. There was a shared awareness, quiet but present, that this was another point of difference, another detail that did not align with expectation. Anna picked up the fork. It felt heavier than she remembered, or perhaps her hands had changed. She did not begin immediately. Instead, she looked at the food for a second longer than necessary, observing the texture, the color, the certainty of it. Then she took a small bite. The taste was simple. Salt. Warmth. Substance. Not diluted. Not improvised. Real. She chewed slowly, not out of caution, but out of attention. Across the table, one of the younger nurses paused mid-motion, her eyes closing for a brief second as she tasted the same thing. No words followed. None were needed. A sound interrupted the quiet rhythm of eating. Not loud. Not abrupt. Just enough to shift attention. A voice, speaking German again. Clear. Controlled. Anna looked up without moving her head too quickly. Captain Brooks stood at the far end of the table line, speaking to an older prisoner who seemed uncertain about something on her tray. He explained, calmly, what each item was, using words that belonged to kitchens and homes, not to camps. His tone did not change. It did not perform. It remained consistent, as if this was not unusual for him. Anna watched the exchange for a few seconds, then returned her attention to her plate. But the presence of that voice, moving through the space, changed the act of eating in a way she could not immediately define. It was not comfort. Not yet. It was alignment. A reduction of distance measured not in steps, but in understanding. She took another bite. This time without pause. The food remained the same. The environment remained controlled. The boundaries remained visible. But something beneath all of it had shifted again, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded reaction, but in a way that accumulated. Small. Precise. Undeniable. Anna finished half of what was on her tray and set the fork down for a moment, her hands resting again on the table. She did not look around this time. She did not need to. The pattern was forming on its own. Not through explanation. Not through instruction. Through repetition of moments that did not match what she had been told to expect. She lifted the fork again, quieter now, more certain, and continued eating as the last of the sunlight disappeared beyond the fence and the camp settled into a rhythm that felt, for the first time, not unfamiliar, but not fully understood. The night did not arrive all at once. It settled in layers, first dimming the edges of the camp, then softening the outlines of the barracks, until only the essential shapes remained. Inside, the overhead lights flickered on, casting a steady, pale glow that erased shadows but not tension. The room felt smaller under artificial light, more contained, as if the walls had moved a few inches closer without anyone noticing. Anna lay on the narrow bunk, her hands folded over her stomach, eyes open, fixed on the wooden slats above her. Sleep did not come. Not yet. Around her, the others shifted quietly, fabric brushing against fabric, the occasional exhale marking the presence of someone else in the dark. No one spoke. The silence had returned, but it was no longer the same silence that had filled the afternoon. This one carried weight. Thought. Questions that had not been asked aloud. Somewhere outside, footsteps passed in a slow, even rhythm. A guard making his rounds. The sound was predictable. Measured. It did not rush. It did not hesitate. Anna listened to it until it faded, then focused on something else. The memory of the voice. Not the words. The structure. The way each sentence had been built with care, as if meaning mattered more than authority. She turned her head slightly toward the window. The screen reflected a faint outline of the room, layered with the darkness outside. For a moment, the two spaces overlapped, inside and outside, separated only by a thin barrier that did not fully conceal either side. A small movement drew her attention. At the far end of the barracks, near the door, a figure paused. Captain Brooks. He stood just inside the threshold, not entering fully, not announcing himself. His presence was quiet, almost incidental, as if he had simply stopped to observe rather than to inspect. He said nothing at first. His eyes moved across the room, not lingering, not searching for fault. Just taking in what was there. Anna remained still. So did everyone else. The stillness was not forced. It was chosen. After a few seconds, he spoke. Again, in German. Lower this time. Softer. Not instructions. Not commands. A simple statement about the schedule for the morning. Breakfast at 6. Work assignments to follow. His voice did not rise to reach the far corners. It did not need to. The room adjusted to it, as if the sound itself carried farther than volume required. Anna noticed the difference immediately. This was not the same tone he had used outside. It was quieter. More contained. As if the space demanded a different kind of respect. When he finished, he did not wait for acknowledgement. He did not ask if they understood. He simply inclined his head slightly, a gesture so small it might have been missed if one was not watching carefully, and stepped back toward the doorway. Then he paused. Not long. Just enough to say one more thing. Rest, he said. One word. In German. No emphasis. No expectation. Just the word, placed into the room like something that belonged there. Then he left. The door remained open for another moment before a corporal moved past and closed it gently, the latch settling into place with a soft click. Anna exhaled slowly, her body registering the shift before her mind fully caught up. Across the room, someone adjusted their position on the bunk. Another turned on to her side. The movements were subtle, but they carried a different quality now. Less guarded. Not relaxed. Not completely. But changed. Anna closed her eyes for the first time since lying down. The darkness behind her eyelids was steady, uninterrupted. She let the sound of the camp settle around her. The distant hum of a generator. The faint rustle of leaves beyond the fence. The absence of raised voices. The absence of urgency. Her thoughts did not resolve into conclusions. They did not need to. Instead, they arranged themselves into something quieter. A recognition that what she had encountered that day was not an exception. It had repeated. In language. In food. In tone. In restraint. Patterns did not lie. She knew that. She had relied on that knowledge in hospital tents, in places where survival depended on noticing what remained consistent. Here, the consistency was different. It was not chaos. It was not cruelty. It was something else. Something she did not yet have a word for. Her breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the room. The tension in her hands eased, fingers no longer curled but resting naturally against the thin blanket. Outside, the footsteps returned briefly, then moved on. Inside, the space held steady. Anna did not think about the question anymore. Not directly. It had already begun to change shape on its own. She did not answer it. She did not need to. Not tonight. Tonight, she allowed something else to take its place. Not certainty. Not trust. But the possibility that both could exist, eventually, in a place she had been told could not contain either. And with that, her eyes remained closed, and for the first time since the ship had touched American soil, sleep did not feel like surrender. It felt like a decision. Morning did not break with sound. It arrived through light, slow and deliberate, pressing through the thin fabric of the curtains and stretching across the wooden floor in long, pale lines. The air was cooler than the night before, carrying a faint trace of moisture that settled briefly on skin before disappearing. Anna opened her eyes without urgency. For a moment, she did not move. She listened. The camp was already awake, but not loud. Footsteps outside, measured and consistent. A distant voice calling out a time. The low metallic clink of something being set down, then adjusted. Nothing sharp. Nothing abrupt. She sat up slowly, her body responding without resistance, as if it had accepted the rhythm of the place more quickly than her thoughts had. Around her, the others were doing the same. No one rushed. Blankets were folded with quiet precision. Shoes were adjusted. Hair tied back. Each movement small, contained, intentional. Anna stood, smoothing the fabric of her uniform once, then stepped toward the window. The yard was already organized into motion. Lines forming without instruction. Groups aligning themselves as if the pattern had been understood overnight. She stepped outside and joined the others, the gravel firm beneath her boots, the morning air carrying a faint warmth that promised heat later in the day. Breakfast was served in the same place as the evening before. The same table. The same arrangement. But something had changed. Not the structure. The feeling. It was less uncertain now. Not familiar. But no longer foreign. When Anna reached the front, the soldier behind the table nodded slightly and handed her a tray. He did not attempt German this time. He did not need to. The exchange was clear without it. She took the tray and moved to the side, finding a place at the table. The food was simple again. Eggs. Bread. Coffee, dark and steady in a metal cup. She sat and began to eat without pause. The hesitation from the night before had lessened. Not disappeared. But reduced. Across from her, one of the nurses spoke quietly, a single sentence, then stopped. The sound of German in the air did not feel isolated anymore. It blended with the rest of the space, no longer separate from it. A shadow crossed the edge of the table. Anna did not look up immediately. She recognized the presence before confirming it. Captain Brooks stood nearby, not at the center, not directing, but observing. He held a clipboard in one hand, his posture unchanged from the day before. When he spoke, it was again in German. Clear. Controlled. He addressed a small group to the side, explaining their assignments for the morning. Laundry detail. Kitchen support. Inventory sorting. His words were specific, but his tone remained the same. No elevation. No urgency. Anna finished her coffee and set the cup down, the metal touching wood with a soft, contained sound. She stood when her name was called. Anna Weiss. The pronunciation was exact. Not approximate. Not adjusted. Exact. She stepped forward, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. He looked at her for a brief moment, not assessing, not questioning. Simply acknowledging. Then he spoke. You have medical experience. It was not a question. She nodded once. Yes. Her voice was quiet, but it held. He paused, just long enough to confirm something internally, then continued. There is a supply room. Basic materials. You will help organize and assist where needed. The words were straightforward. Functional. But the decision carried something else. Recognition. Not of rank. Not of past affiliation. Of skill. Anna inclined her head slightly. Understood. No more was required. He gestured once, indicating direction, then moved on to the next name without transition. Anna stepped back into the line, but the space around her felt different now. Not larger. Not smaller. Just altered. She moved toward the building he had indicated, her pace steady, her attention focused. Inside, the supply room was arranged with the same precision she had begun to expect. Shelves aligned. Materials sorted. Labels clear. Nothing excessive. Nothing lacking. She set her hands lightly on the edge of the table and took in the room in a single glance. This, she understood. This language did not require translation. Order. Function. Care. She began to work, adjusting small inconsistencies, aligning items, restoring a system that was already close to complete. Outside, the camp continued its rhythm. Inside, Anna found something quieter. Not comfort. Not yet. But clarity. The kind that did not depend on explanation. The kind that built itself, slowly, through repetition and observation. And as she moved from one shelf to the next, her hands steady, her mind focused, the distance between what she had expected and what she was experiencing did not disappear. It narrowed. Just enough to notice. Just enough to matter. The room settled into a rhythm that did not require instruction. Shelves aligned. Materials grouped by size, by purpose, by frequency of use. Anna moved through the space with quiet precision, her hands adjusting small details that most would not notice, labels turned to face outward, edges brought into line, gaps closed without force. The work did not demand urgency. It required attention. That was something she understood without effort. A tray of medical supplies sat slightly out of place near the back wall. Gauze, bandages, small bottles with handwritten markings. She paused there, her fingers hovering for a moment before she began to sort them, not by the labels alone, but by familiarity, by the subtle differences in texture and weight that training had taught her to recognize. Outside the open door, the camp continued its measured motion. Footsteps passed, voices low, a cart rolling over gravel with a steady, repetitive sound. Nothing interrupted the pattern. Nothing rushed it forward. Time moved, but it did not press. A shadow crossed the doorway. Anna did not turn immediately. She finished aligning the last stack of folded cloth, then straightened slightly, her posture returning to stillness before she acknowledged the presence. Captain Brooks stood just inside the threshold, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. He did not step further in. He did not announce himself. He observed. His gaze moved across the room, taking in the arrangement, the order that had shifted subtly under Anna's hands. He said nothing for several seconds. The silence held, not uncomfortable, not forced, simply present. Then he spoke. In German. You reorganized this. It was not a question. Anna turned to face him fully, her expression neutral, her hands resting loosely at her sides. It was already organized, she replied, her voice steady. I adjusted what was inconsistent. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the distinction. His eyes moved briefly to the shelves again, then back to her. You noticed details. The statement carried no weight beyond observation. Anna did not respond immediately. She considered the words, not their meaning, but their intent. There was no test in them. No hidden expectation. Just recognition. It is necessary, she said finally. He held her gaze for a moment, then shifted his attention to the table beside her. A small glass vial sat near the edge, its label slightly turned, the writing not fully visible. He reached out, adjusted it by a fraction of an inch, aligning it with the others, then withdrew his hand. The movement was precise. Familiar. Not practiced for effect. Anna noticed it without reacting. He spoke again, still in German, his tone unchanged. Where did you train? The question was simple. Direct. Anna answered without hesitation. Munich. Field Hospital. He nodded once, as if confirming something already assumed. You will find this easier than most assignments. She did not interpret the statement as reassurance. It was not offered that way. It was practical. Accurate. She inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them remained steady, not closing, not expanding. Then, almost without transition, he said something different. Your pronunciation is precise. The words were unexpected. Not because of their content, but because of their direction. Anna's expression did not change, but her attention sharpened. It is my language, she replied. He shook his head slightly, a small correction. Not everyone speaks it that way. The statement carried a quiet weight, not of disagreement, but of experience. Anna held his gaze for a fraction longer than before, then looked past him briefly, as if considering something beyond the room. When she spoke again, her voice remained even. And yours? He did not answer immediately. His eyes shifted, not away, but inward, as if the question had reached somewhere he did not respond to quickly. Then he said, I learned it before the war. No explanation followed. None was offered. None was requested. The words settled between them, complete in their simplicity. Anna nodded once. That was enough. He stepped back from the doorway, his presence receding without ceremony. Continue, he said, the single word carrying the same tone as before. Not a command. Not a dismissal. Just direction. Then he turned and moved away, his footsteps blending into the rhythm outside. Anna remained where she was for a moment longer, her hands still, her mind not searching for meaning, but registering what had been given. Not information. Not authority. Something quieter. She turned back to the shelves, her movements resuming with the same precision as before. But now, the pattern held one more detail. One more point of alignment that had not been there before. And as she adjusted the final row of supplies, the space no longer felt like a place she had been assigned to. It felt like a place she understood. The afternoon light entered the supply room at an angle, thinner now, less direct, turning the edges of glass and metal into muted reflections rather than sharp lines. Anna stood near the center table, a small ledger open in front of her, its pages filled with careful handwriting that tracked quantities, dates, and usage. The system was functional, but not complete. She adjusted it quietly, adding structure where there had been approximation, aligning entries so that patterns could be seen without effort. Her pencil moved steadily, not fast, not slow, each mark placed with intention. Outside, the sounds of the camp shifted slightly as the day progressed. The rhythm remained, but it softened, as if the weight of the sun had pressed everything into a slower pace. A breeze moved through the doorway, carrying with it the faint scent of cut grass and warm dust. It passed through the room without interruption, lifting a corner of a loose paper before settling again. Anna reached out and placed it flat, her hand resting there for a second longer than necessary. The quiet was not empty. It held presence. A small knock sounded against the doorframe. Not loud. Not formal. Just enough to announce without intruding. Anna looked up. A young soldier stood there, his posture slightly uncertain, as if he had not fully decided how to occupy the space. He held a small box in both hands. When he spoke, it was in English, measured but less controlled than the officers. Anna did not respond immediately. She waited. He hesitated, then shifted, searching for something he knew she would understand. Medical, he said, then gestured to the box. The word was simple. The meaning clear. Anna stepped forward, closing the distance without hurry. She took the box, her fingers brushing the edge of the cardboard, noting its weight, its balance. Inside were additional supplies, not yet sorted, not yet placed into the system she had begun to shape. She nodded once. The soldier returned the gesture, relieved by the clarity of the exchange, then stepped back without further attempt at conversation. The moment passed. Anna carried the box to the table and opened it carefully. Inside, items were arranged without pattern. Bottles mixed with cloth, instruments placed without separation. She began to sort them immediately, her hands moving with quiet certainty. As she worked, the doorway filled again, but this time without sound. Captain Brooks stood there, not interrupting, not announcing. His presence was consistent now, not unexpected, not disruptive. Anna did not look up right away. She finished placing a set of instruments into a tray, aligning them by size and function, then straightened and met his gaze. He stepped inside this time, just one pace, enough to enter the room without claiming it. His eyes moved briefly over the table, taking in the new arrangement, the opened box, the system forming around it. "You improve it," he said, in German. Anna considered the words, then replied, "It becomes easier to use." He nodded slightly, as if the distinction mattered. His gaze shifted to the ledger, still open on the table. He stepped closer, not invading, but observing, his attention focused on the structure she had created. "You record everything." Again, not a question. "It prevents mistakes," she answered. He rested his hand lightly on the edge of the table, not touching the pages, not altering anything. "And when there are no mistakes?" Anna paused, her hand still over a row of small bottles. "Then nothing needs to be explained," she said. The words settled between them, quiet, complete. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the arrangement again, the alignment, the clarity, the absence of excess. Then he said, "Before the war, I studied in Heidelberg." The statement arrived without transition, as if it had been part of the conversation all along. Anna did not react outwardly, but something in her attention shifted, narrowing slightly. "Medicine," he added, after a moment. "Not elaboration. Just placement." Anna nodded once. The connection did not need to be spoken fully. It existed in the details. In the way he had adjusted the vial earlier. In the way he observed without interfering. In the way he spoke the language not as a tool, but as something lived. "You did not finish," she said, not as a question, but as a recognition. He looked at her, his expression unchanged. "No," the answer was simple. Final. Neither of them expanded on it. There was nothing to add that would not reduce it. The room held still for a moment, the quiet deepening without pressure. Then he straightened slightly, his hand leaving the table. "Continue," he said again, the same word as before, carrying the same tone. "Direction without force." He turned and stepped out of the room, his presence receding as smoothly as it had entered. Anna remained still for a second longer, her hand resting on the edge of the table, her mind not searching for meaning, but acknowledging it. Then she turned back to the supplies, her movements resuming, but with a difference so small it could not be seen. Only felt. The system she was building was no longer just about order. It held something else now. A shared understanding, unspoken, precise, and quietly irreversible. The day moved forward without announcement, but the change could be felt in the way the light shifted across the floor, longer now, stretching toward the back wall of the supply room before slowly retreating. Anna finished the last entry in the ledger and closed it with a soft, controlled motion, her hand resting on the cover for a brief moment as if confirming the work had reached a natural pause. Outside, the sound of activity had thinned. Fewer footsteps. Fewer voices. The rhythm of the camp did not stop, but it softened, transitioning into something quieter, more contained. She stepped toward the doorway, not with urgency, but with intention, allowing herself a brief moment to observe beyond the room she had begun to understand. The yard was different in the late afternoon. The sharp edges of movement had rounded. Groups that had been structured earlier were now dispersed into smaller, quieter patterns. A few prisoners sat near the far fence, their posture relaxed but not careless, speaking in low tones that did not carry. A pair of soldiers walked past at an even pace, their conversation brief, then gone. Nothing drew attention to itself. Nothing demanded it. Anna leaned lightly against the doorframe, her hand resting against the wood, her gaze steady. She did not search for anything specific, but her attention settled naturally toward the far side of the yard. Captain Brooks stood near a small table, reviewing a set of papers. His posture was unchanged. Straight. Balanced. His movements minimal. He turned a page, paused, then made a small note with a pencil, the gesture precise, almost identical to the way Anna had written in the ledger moments before. The similarity did not feel coincidental. It registered quietly, without reaction. A soldier approached him, spoke briefly in English, and handed over another document. Brooks nodded once, listened without interruption, then responded in a tone too low to carry. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. No emphasis. No authority displayed beyond what was necessary. The soldier stepped away, and Brooks returned to the papers, his attention narrowing again. Anna watched for a few seconds longer, then stepped back inside. The room felt unchanged, but her perception of it had shifted slightly, as if the boundary between inside and outside had become less absolute. She moved back to the table, adjusting a single item that had drifted slightly out of alignment, restoring the pattern without thought. The action was small, almost automatic, but it carried the same precision as everything she had done since morning. A sound behind her drew her attention. Not footsteps. Not a voice. The faint scrape of something being set down near the entrance. She turned. A wooden crate, newly delivered, sat just inside the doorway. No one stood beside it. No announcement had been made. The crate was simply there, as if placed into the room without ceremony. Anna approached it, her steps measured, her gaze steady. She knelt slightly and opened the lid, lifting it just enough to see inside before fully committing to the motion. More supplies. Larger this time. Bulk materials. Not urgent. Not disordered. Just waiting. She lifted one item, examined it briefly, then placed it on the table, beginning the same process as before. Sorting. Aligning. Understanding. As she worked, the light continued to shift, dimming gradually, turning the edges of the room softer, less defined. The open doorway framed the outside in a narrower band of color, the sky now deeper, the air cooler by a few degrees. A presence filled the doorway again. She did not need to turn to recognize it. Captain Brooks stood there, not stepping in this time, not interrupting the flow of her work. He watched for a moment, his attention on the crate, the items already arranged, the pattern extending itself without instruction. "It continues," he said in German, his voice as steady as before. Anna did not stop what she was doing. "It must," she replied, placing another item into position. He remained there, observing, not correcting, not guiding. After a few seconds, he spoke again. "Do you find it different here?" The question was simple. Direct. It carried no pressure. Anna paused, her hand resting on the edge of the crate, her gaze lowering slightly as she considered the words. Not the meaning. The truth of it. "Yes," she said. Nothing more. He did not ask for explanation. He did not require it. The answer was sufficient. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that did not expand into conversation. Then, without transition, he stepped away from the doorway, his presence receding into the same quiet rhythm that defined everything else. Anna remained still for a moment, her hand still resting where it had paused. The question lingered, not as a challenge, but as a point of recognition. Different did not mean understood. Not yet. But it no longer meant unknown. She returned to the crate, her movements resuming, steady, precise, uninterrupted. And as the last of the light slipped lower, and the room settled into the early edge of evening, the pattern she had begun that morning extended itself further, no longer just an act of organization, but a quiet acceptance of something she had not expected to encounter. Not kindness. Not yet. But something structured. Something consistent. Something that did not need to prove itself, because it repeated, again and again, without changing its form. The evening settled with a kind of quiet certainty, not dramatic, not sudden, but complete in its presence. The last of the light faded from the doorway, leaving the supply room in a soft, even glow that flattened shadows and clarified edges. Anna closed the crate, her hands resting briefly on the lid as if acknowledging the end of something that had not been formally announced. The room was in order. Not perfect. Not finished. but aligned in a way that made sense. She stepped back, her gaze moving across the shelves, the table, the ledger now returned to its place. Nothing called for correction. Nothing demanded attention. Outside, the sounds of the camp had thinned further. The low murmur of voices, the distant movement of boots on gravel, the faint hum of machinery settling into rest. It was not silence. It was structure without noise. Anna moved toward the doorway and stepped outside, the air cooler now, carrying the first hints of night. The sky had deepened into a darker shade, the last trace of daylight lingering near the horizon before giving way. She stood still for a moment, not searching, not expecting, just present within the space that had shifted around her over the course of the day. Across the yard, Captain Brooks stood near the same table as before, though the papers were gone now, replaced by nothing. His hands rested loosely at his sides. He was not working. Not directing. Simply there. The distance between them remained, unchanged in measure, but different in quality. Anna began to walk, not directly toward him, but along the path that crossed the yard, her step steady, unhurried. She did not plan to stop. She did not plan to speak. But when she reached the point where their paths aligned, she paused. Not fully. Just enough to acknowledge. He turned slightly, recognizing the movement without surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air held steady, the space between them defined not by tension, but by clarity. Then Anna said, in German, her voice quiet but certain, "You did not finish your studies." It was not a question. It did not need to be. He looked at her, his expression unchanged, but his attention fully present. "No," he said. The answer was the same as before. Unexpanded. Complete. Anna nodded once, as if confirming something that had already settled into place. She did not ask why. She did not need to. Instead, she said something else. "You still use it." His gaze shifted slightly, not away, but inward, as if measuring the weight of the observation. Then he replied, "Some things do not belong to war." The words were simple. Unadorned. But they carried a clarity that did not require explanation. Anna held his gaze for a fraction longer, then inclined her head slightly, a gesture that mirrored his own from the night before. No more was needed. No further exchange would have added to what had already been understood. She stepped past him, continuing along the path, her pace unchanged, her posture steady. He did not turn to watch her go. He did not call after her. The moment ended without closure, but not without meaning. Anna reached the far side of the yard and stopped near the edge of the fence. She placed her hand lightly against the cool metal, not gripping it, just touching it, feeling the boundary without testing it. Beyond it, the land stretched into darkness, indistinct, undefined. Behind her, the camp remained structured, contained, consistent. She stood there for a few seconds, her gaze forward, her breathing steady. The question that had formed on the first day no longer held the same shape. It had not been answered. It had been replaced. Not by certainty. Not by trust. But by something quieter. Something that did not require resolution to exist. She turned back toward the barracks, her steps measured, her attention no longer divided between expectation and observation. The pattern had established itself. Not through declaration. Not through persuasion. Through repetition. Through detail. Through the absence of contradiction. As she entered the building, the familiar sounds of the evening returned, soft movement, low voices, the quiet preparation for rest. She moved to her bunk and sat, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her posture unchanged. Nothing outward marked the shift that had taken place. Nothing needed to. It existed beneath the surface, precise and stable. She did not think about the voice anymore. Not in isolation. It had become part of a larger pattern, one that extended beyond language into action, into restraint, into the deliberate choice to maintain something that did not have to be maintained. Anna lay back slowly, her gaze settling on the ceiling once more. The wood above her was the same. The room was the same. But her understanding of where she was had changed in a way that did not need to be spoken. She closed her eyes, not as an escape, not as a surrender, but as a continuation of something that no longer felt uncertain. And in the quiet that followed, one thought remained, not as a question, but as a recognition. He did not raise his voice. He changed the distance.